Thank you for joining me for part 2 of To Eliminate the Opiate, Vol.1 by Rabbi Marvin Antleman. Part 2 is in 5 chapters, and we'll be doing each chapter individually. I've tried to do all of them together, but it just collapses the video program. So we'll begin part 2, the activities of 18th century revolutionary societies, with chapter 8, entitled The Illuminati and Haskala. Having considered fleetingly the origins of the Illuminati in our discussions of the Reform movement and the Bund der Gerechten, we shall now discuss in greater detail the organization and operations of the Illuminati, which preceded by about 2 generations the period just discussed. While perhaps logically one would wish to present history as a chronology, the author feels that the reader could better appreciate the inauspicious beginnings of the Illuminati, having come upon the scene of 19th century political and religious turmoil, with which he could more closely relate to present-day experience. It is known that political scientists are divided as to the Illuminati and its relationship with the Communist Party. There is no argument about the relationship between the Illuminati and the Jacobins, who executed the terror during the French Revolution. There is also no argument among prominent Judaic scholars as to the continuum that existed between Jewish-born heretics, who were followers of the false Messiah Shabbatai Zvi, 1626 to 1676, through his successors, the radical practitioners of the Sabbatian cult called the Frankists, named after their founder, Jacob Frank, 1726 to 1791, the Jacobins, and the Reform movement. The Illuminati paralleled the Frankists in both time and geography. The seat of both movements being in Germany, the Illuminati in Ingolstadt, Bavaria, and the Frankists in Offenbach after 1786. We shall demonstrate that, from the Jewish perspective, there is a relationship between the Illuminati and the Communists. The connection between Frankists and Jacobins, and Frankists and the Reform movement, has been brought to light by one of the greatest living authorities on the mystical Kabbalistic literature, Professor Gershom G. Scholem of the Hebrew University, Jerusalem. We furthermore have the testimony of John Robison in his Proofs of a Conspiracy, published in 1798, which details the development of the Illuminati and its rise to power, their connection with the Jacobins, and with the terror which took place during the French Revolution. The famous Count Mirabeau of French Revolution fame was, according to Robison, a member of the Illuminati. In addition to Robison's work, there also exists the writings of Abbe Augustin Barruel, who wrote Memoirs Illustrating the History of Jacobinism in 1799. Robison traces the Illuminati to an aberration in Freemasonry started by Adam Yshop and as assisted by Baron Adolf Franz Friedrich Nige, 1752 to 1796. Nige is mentioned constantly throughout Robison's book. At the end of the first chapter, Robison's conspiracy book, entitled Schisms in Freemasonry, he says Baron Nige and other cosmopolitical brethren formed a scheme for uniting radical Masonic lodges in Germany. Nige was dissatisfied with all the degrees of Freemasonry, and he wanted to carry things one step further. In Chapter 2, Robison presents a list of lodges with the Illuminati, existing primarily in Germany, with a few in England, Scotland, Poland, Switzerland, France, and Italy, as well as America. He also gives names of members. Some of the more important Illuminati mentioned by Robison were given code names. These code names were based for them, on the most part, really, the classical Greek and Roman personalities who were known for their ruthlessness and cynicism. So Robison actually provides a table of the most prominent Illuminati members and their respective occupations or ranks. Now, Yshop had the code name of Spartacus. Nige was Philo. Count Mirabeau was Cornelius Scipio. Nikolai was Lucian, and Lucian was the greatest scoffer of religion. Particularistic tasks involving the undermining of religion were given to Nikolai. The radicalism of the Illuminati was manifested in public and in private. Their goal was to abolish Christianity and overturn all civil government. In 1783, 4 professors of a Marianan academy were summoned before a court of inquiry and questioned of their allegiance to the order of the Illuminati. During these inquiries, it was brought out that the order abjured Christianity and refused admission into its higher degrees to all who adhered to Catholicism's 3 confessions. According to Robison, quote, sensual pleasures were restored to the rank they held in the Epicurean philosophy. Self-murder was justified on Stoical principles. In the lodges, death was declared as an eternal sleep. Patriotism and loyalty were called narrow-minded prejudices and incompatible with universal benevolence. Continual declamations were made on liberty and equality as the unalienable rights of man. The baneful influence of accumulated property was declared an insurmountable obstacle to the happiness of any nation whose chief laws were framed for its protection and increase. End quote. All this is quite again in keeping with Yshop's own codename Spartacus, the man who headed the insurrection of slaves and kept Rome in terror and uproar for 3 years. Following this expose of the order, it was discovered that Yshop was its head. He was deprived of his professor's chair and banished from Bavaria. He went to Regensburg, where he continued his activities, and along with him 2 Italians, the Marquis Costanza and the Marquis Savioli, were also banished, together with a lawyer named Zwack, while some other members were even imprisoned. Robinson further exposes letters of the secret correspondence between members of the Illuminati, in which he reveals how debased some of them were. For example, in a memo from Spartacus to Cato, which was from Yshop to lawyer Zwack, dated March 17, 1778, Yshop sets down a blueprint for engaging in espionage. In his writings of Zwack were the plans for a women's liberation movement. Zwack states it should consist of 2 classes, the virtuous and the free-hearted, i.e. those who fly out of the common tract of prudish manners. Proper books must be put into their hands, and such as are flattering to their passions. Found with Zwack's writings after his death are descriptions of a strongbox which, if forced open, would blow up and destroy its contents. Recipes for securing an abortion, a chemical composition which blinds or kills when spurted into the face, a recipe for invisible ink, a formula for making tea which induces abortion, a method for filling a bedroom with poisonous gas, methods for forging seals of state, including a collection of several hundred such impressions, with a list of their owners, including princes, nobles, clergymen, and prominent merchants, a copy of a manuscript entitled Better Than Horace, which was printed and distributed at a Leipzig fair, containing an attack and a bitter satire on all religion. After this was exposed, the Illuminati said that all the dreadful medical apparatus properly belonged in the hands of Zwack because, after all, he was a judge of the criminal court, and it was his duty to know such things. The same excuse was also offered for his collection of seals, but of course, the damning question was, why were these things found among the papers of the Illuminati? When Yshop was confronted with this, his reaction was, these things were not carried into effect, only spoken of, and were justifiable when taken in proper connection. In another memo from Spartacus to Cato, Yshop is rather verbose about his anti-religious philosophy. He felt that Freemasonry is concealed Christianity and that Christ should be substituted with the word reason. He then calls for a new religion and a new state government, which explains Masonic symbols and combines them in 1 degree. He also makes reference that there is now in his order a famous Protestant theologian who feels that the order of the Illuminati is the true sense of Christianity and takes great pride that he is now the founder of a new religion. In another piece of correspondence from Philo, who was Nige, to Cato, who was Zwack, Nige refers to religious authorities as cheats who bow to superstition and fanaticism. He advocates a slow overthrow of religion so that the fanatics will not be alarmed and will not be aware of what is going on. Of Jewish mysticism, he declares, the Jewish theosophy was a mystery like the Eleusinian or the Pythagorean, unfit for the vulgar. In September 1783, Yshop wrote to codename Marius, who was Canon Hertel, that he is in danger of losing my honor and my reputation, by which I have long had such influence. What think you? My sister-in-law is with child. He goes on further to say, we have tried every method in our power to destroy the child. He then begs Marius to try to get a doctor to kill his sister-in-law. He claims that she is in her 4th month. Then he blames the priests because they consider abortion to be criminal. Robison points out that when this happened, Zwack's sister is recorded as having committed suicide. Robison speculates that she is perhaps the person Yshop was speaking about. So he got his sister-in-law pregnant. They didn't believe in abortion, so he offed her. Robison offers an interesting insight into why the Illuminati were interested in setting up sisterhoods and promoting women's liberation. Citing some of the Illuminati philosophers, he feels that the female mind is well adapted to cultivation by means of religion, and that feminine softness and kindness of heart and the virtues of motherhood would always tend to push men into more noble pursuits and towards religion. The new order, by changing the women, could hopefully force the sentiments of men to change, and they would not be so foolish as to keep in force laws which cramp their strongest desires. Then the rich will have their harems and the poor their drudges. As the Illuminati spread over Germany, in addition to using the Freemasons and attempting to subvert legitimate Freemasonic lodges into their order, they also set up reading societies. On their book lists were such works as Bestow's Practical Knowledge, Eberhard's Apology for Socrates, Miner's Ancient Mysteries, Barth's Letters on the Bible, and Completion of the Plan and Aim of Jesus Christ. These books were all anti-religious in character and tended to influence men into shaking off any moral obligations they had. They also encouraged people to behave in a Machiavellian manner in their civil conduct. The Illuminati also encouraged their members throughout machinations and intrigues to obtain positions or places of trust and influence. Robison mentions that when the publication of a list of members came out in Germany, persons were astonished to find themselves in every quarter in the midst of villains that were plotting against the peace and happiness of the country and destroying every sentiment of religion, morality, and loyalty. Robison traces Illuminati activities through the German Union, and in his final 4th chapter, he discusses their role in the French Revolution. He notes that during the Revolution, cosmopolitical and sceptical opinions and sentiments were able to find full expression in the political occurrences in France. He delves into the intrigues of the famous Count Honor Gabriel Riquetti Mirabeau, 1749 to 1791, not to be confused with his father Victor, 1715 to 1789. Robison then tells us that Mirabeau published an essay on the fictitious group, the Illuminated, in Berlin. In the essay, Mirabeau calls the Illuminated absurd and gross fanatics waging war with every appearance of reason and maintaining the most ridiculous superstitions. He also describes in the essay rituals and ceremonies of his own invention. Robison claims that Mirabeau wrote this essay as a masterstroke of political intrigue to conceal from the world his rumored association with the Illuminati. Shortly thereafter, Nicolai utilized Mirabeau's essay and gave the name Obscuranten to the society which Mirabeau ridiculed. Then the Illuminati utilized this mystical Obscuranten society as the weapon to destroy their political enemies, so that they immediately labeled several persons to be members of the Obscuranten, securing their own advantage. The history books tell much about Mirabeau. Being in the public eye, he was known as the founder of the Jacobins and as a sexually depraved individual. He literally sold his mother down the river for money after being liberated from prison for a misdemeanor and needing money. He helped his father secure a separation from his mother for 100 guineas. Then he went to his mother and got money from her to go against his father. In 1786, Mirabeau, in conjunction with the Duc de Luzon and the Abbé Perigord, formed a radical lodge in Paris which met in the Jacobin College, hence the name Jacobins. The lodge was in constant contact with Germany. So important did the German Illuminati regard the Jacobin Lodge that they sent an entire delegation of German Illuminati to foment the French Revolution. Of the Jacobin goals in Paris, Robison tells us that they meant to abolish the laws which protected property accumulated by the long-continued and successful industry and to prevent the future of any such accumulation. And as necessary preparations for all of this, they intended to root out all religion and ordinary morality, and even to break the bonds of domestic life by destroying the veneration for religious vows and by taking their education of the children out of the hands of the parents. This was all that the Illuminati could touch, and it was precisely what France has done. Robison goes on to explain how the Duke of Orleans was seduced by Mirabeau into becoming a degenerate. Robison describes how the Duke of Orleans obtained, at Mirabeau's instigation, 300 prostitutes which were sent to, quote, illuminate 2 battalions who were coming to Versailles for the protection of the royal family. Robison further declares that the Duke of Orleans, before his death, acknowledged the vast sums were used to bribe mobs such as these, which came from Paris to Versailles on October 5th, 1789. They had their pockets stuffed with crown pieces supplied by Orleans, who had been seen circulating with others with a tremendous bag of money. Robison continues to describe how, after the Revolution, the Jacobins, through the Illuminati, continued their depraved influence on life in France. For example, he describes a man named Zimmerman as one of the greatest of the Illuminati in France. Zimmerman would get up on the pulpit with a saber in his hand and cry out, "Behold, Frenchmen, this is your God. This alone can save you." Robison also accuses the Illuminati of attempting to pass a law in France that would establish atheism. During the French Revolution, the strength of the Illuminati had been concentrated in Regensburg as a result of Yshop's forced exile. Quoting from another author, Hoffman, a second plan was now being put into effect for a revolution in Germany. Hoffman states, "All of us jointly swore opposition to the Illuminati, and my friends considered me as a proper instrument for this proposal. To whet my zeal, they put papers into my hands which made me shudder. The intelligence saw in the open system of the Jacobins the complete hidden system of the Illuminati. We knew that this system considered the whole world in its aims, and France was only the place of its first explosion." In a postscript to his book, Robison writes that he has seen Abby Barrel's book on the history of Jacobinism, which has confirmed everything that he has said concerning the Enlighteners. He shows unquestionably that the formal and systematic conspiracy against religion was formed and zealously prosecuted by Voltaire, d'Alembert, and Diderot, assisted by Frederick II, King of Prussia. And I see their principles and their manner of procedure have been the same with those of the German atheists and anarchists. Like them, they hired an army of writers. They industriously pushed their writings into every house and every cottage. Those writings were equally calculated for inflaming and sensual appetites of men and for perverting their judgments. They endeavored to get the command of the schools, particularly those for the lower classes, and they erected and managed a prodigious number of libraries and reading societies. Now, Robison's remarks sound almost identical with those accusations against Marxist-Leninist activities that have emanated in recent years from the hallowed halls of the Congress of the United States. Of course, the Jews also had their enlighteners, who appeared on the horizon at that time, and their movement is referred to as the Haskala. While we have shown the connection between some of the members of the Haskala in Russia in conjunction with the attempted overthrow of Judaism and the Bundegerechten, the question is, were their predecessors Jacobins, or were they linked in any way with members of the Illuminati? The answer is a definitive yes. For when Count Mirabeau came to Paris to form the Jacobins in 1786, that was the year of Moses Mendelssohn's death. And not only that, but Count Mirabeau attended his funeral and even wrote an essay about the man. Well, who was this man, Moses Mendelssohn? And what was his influence on the Haskala? Moses Mendelssohn was born on September 6, 1729 in Dessau, Germany. When Mirabeau attended his funeral, it was after January 4th, 1786, the day of his death. The title of Mirabeau's essay was Sur Moses Mendelssohn sur la réforme politique des Juifs, which means Concerning Moses Mendelssohn on Political Reform of the Jews, which appeared in London in 1787. In his essay, Mirabeau argues that the faults of the Jews were those of their circumstances, and that the Jews could be made useful citizens if they could get rid of the dark phantoms of the Talmudists. Mirabeau was very much akin to the personality of the Antiochus, who would accept a Jew as long as he was a Hellenist, in contradistinction to a Haman, which wanted Jews dead. Mirabeau wanted the Jew to disappear by assimilation. Moses Mendelssohn is regarded by many as the father of the Haskala movement. Indeed, he was a role model for German Jewry for assimilation. For example, in Maurice Schwartz's Yiddish theatrical presentation of The Family Karnofsky in 1948, Karnofsky, a German Jew, returns from World War I, marries a Gentile, and justifies it because of Moses Mendelssohn. Many writers, even in discussing other subjects, will usually mention in passing Moses Mendelssohn's influence on the Haskala. For example, Rufus Learcy, in writing on the history of Jews in America, states, "But the traditional or religious way of life, which the bulk of the immigrants from Eastern Europe carried with them to America, was no longer unchallenged, even in their homelands. Intellectual and social movements were already afoot in all of them whose basic character was secular. The first and the oldest was Haskala, which traced its origin back to Moses Mendelssohn, the frail and gentle sage of Berlin, who died 3 years before the outbreak of the French Revolution." Dr. Simon Novak, editor of Great Jewish Personalities in Modern Times, says of the Haskala that it was among the Jews of Berlin that secular interests made their greatest progress. And here existed the largest Jewish community in Germany, totaling around 4,000 Jewish immigrants, even before Mendelssohn's death. It was in Berlin that the organized Haskala movement, representing the first systematic attempt of Jews to meet the challenges of the modern world, grew up. The leader of the movement, around whom the enlightened gathered and to whom all looked for inspiration, was Moses Mendelssohn. Historian Max Dimont tells us something else about his opinions of Mendelssohn, which belies not only Mendelssohn's true position with respect to authentic Judaism, but Dimont's attitude towards religious Jews. Dimont's view in his Jews, God, and History is that religious Jews are like refuse. Dimont says, quote, "Mendelssohn clearly saw the dilemma of the danger to the Jews. If they remained in the ghetto, they would stagnate into a meaningless existence. If, on the other hand, they were catapulted out of the ghetto by the new social forces shattering feudalism without being prepared for the Enlightenment, they would be swallowed up by the dominant Christian majority." Mendelssohn saw his task as twofold. First, to give the Jews a tool for their own emancipation. Second, to prepare a new basis for the Judaic values once the old religious norms were rejected. The way Hercules diverted the flows of the two rivers into the Augean stables to clean out decades of accumulated refuse, so Mendelssohn channeled the currents of the Aufklärung into the ghetto to sweep out centuries of accumulated orthodoxy. End quote. All these citations are just exemplary of the popularly held view that Mendelssohn, in his original Maskell, or Enlightener, of the Haskala. What, however, were the salient messages and goals that Mendelssohn wanted to get across to his generation of Jews? Well, they can be summarized in 4 things. The first is aid the Jews in moving out of the ghetto by telling them that they must acquire the culture of their country in order to do this, and through this, begin a process of assimilation. 2, sell the viewpoint that the Jewish religion has no dogmas or articles of faith. Its spirit is freedom in doctrine and conformity in action. 3, popularize the concept that the doctrines and ethical teachings of Judaism are those of reason and hence universal. And 4, establish Judaism as only a religion and that the loyalty to it is compatible with a national state. There is no doubt that the stature of Mendelssohn as a role model of an intellectual Jew helped better the civil rights of Jews in Germany and throughout Europe. However, when one studies the philosophy of Mendelssohn and compares his theology with that of either his great contemporary co-religionists, such as Immanuel Kant or the great Talmudic scholar Rabbi Ezekiel Landau of Prague, 1713 to 1793, one is rather appalled how such a second-rate philosopher and theologian gets star billing in the history books and seems to have found such tremendous and instantaneous recognition in Germany in his day. While it is true that Mendelssohn has made a name for himself before the founding of the Illuminati in 1776, it is rather startling that the works for which he is best known in the Jewish community, a philosophical treatise entitled Jerusalem and his Boyer, which was a translation of the Bible into German, they were neither written nor published until after the Illuminati had gotten off the ground in Germany. Jerusalem appeared in 1783, and the first volume of his Blur came out in 1783. Mendelssohn was aided in putting out the Boyer by a circle of fellow enlighteners, which included Naphtali Hertz Weissel, Aaron Friedenthal, and Hertz Homburg.